Welcome to Café Stories. I'm Alfie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson today in foggy Victorian London with the disappearance of the Dover Express. This is a tale of impossible vanishings, ancient Tibetan secrets, and the dangerous intersection of mystical knowledge with modern science. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Settle in with a warm cup of coffee, stay curious, let's ease into it. Sherlock Holmes and the Disappearance of the Dover Express. Chapter 1. A Most Unusual Telegram. It was in the latter part of November, in that memorable year of '89, when London lay shrouded in a thick yellow fog that had persisted for the better part of a week. The gaslights along Baker Street shone as mere orbs of dull orange through the murk, and the chill that permeated our sitting room seemed impervious to the coal fire that crackled in the grate. My friend Sherlock Holmes sat hunched in his armchair, his thin fingers steepled beneath his chin, his attention wholly absorbed by a chemical treatise which lay open upon his knees. For 3 days he had barely stirred, save to conduct some malodorous experiment at his chemical table, which had added such fumes to our already oppressive atmosphere that I had been driven to open the window despite the inclement weather. I had been attempting to read the latest medical journal, but found my attention wandering. The fog had brought with it a host of bronchial complaints to my practice, and I was weary from my rounds. Moreover, I confess that a certain restlessness had taken hold of me, for it had been some weeks since Holmes had been engaged in a case of any significance, and I had begun to dread the black mood that inevitably descended upon him in the absence of intellectual stimulation. As if sensing my thoughts, Holmes suddenly closed his book with a sharp snap. "You are concerned about me, Watson?" he said, without looking up. "I am merely wondering if this fog will ever lift," I replied, though I knew the futility of dissembling, before those keen grey eyes which now lifted to study my face. "You need not worry. I find this monograph on the coagulation properties of rare poisons quite stimulating," he said, with a thin smile. "Though I confess that a problem of more immediate human interest would not be unwelcome." The words had scarcely left his lips when we heard the sharp peal of our doorbell, followed by hurried footsteps upon the 17 stairs that led to our quarters. "A telegram," said Holmes, straightening in his chair. "Delivered by a messenger, who has run at least half a mile through the fog, judging by his pace." "How could you possibly—" I began, but was interrupted by a knock at our door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a yellow envelope upon a silver tray. "A telegram for Mr. Holmes," she announced. "The boy who brought it was in such a state, all out of breath and dripping with the fog." Holmes nodded as if this merely confirmed his expectations and took the envelope with a word of thanks. He tore it open, and I observed a sudden sharpening of his gaze as he scanned the contents. "What is it, Holmes?" I inquired, noting the change in his demeanour. "It would appear, Watson, that the world has become a more interesting place in the last few minutes." He handed me the telegram, which read, "Come at once. Stop Dover Express, vanished in Blackheath Tunnel stop, 47 souls aboard. Stop train entered, never emerged. Stop tunnel empty. Stop have found single glove with strange marking. Stop need your expertise. Stop Lestrade." I stared at the words, certain that I had misunderstood them. "Vanished? An entire train with passengers? That's impossible, Holmes." "So one would think," he replied, springing to his feet with a sudden energy that transformed him. Gone was the lethargic scholar of moments before, replaced by a man of action. And yet if we eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. But how could a train simply disappear? That, my dear Watson, is precisely the question. Holmes crossed to the window and peered out into the swirling fog. The Dover Express is a substantial machine of iron and steel, weighing many tons, to say nothing of its human cargo. Its disappearance represents a problem of singular novelty. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with that familiar light I had come to associate with the beginning of a promising investigation. "What do you know of Blackheath Tunnel?" "Very little," I admitted. "It's not a particularly long tunnel, as I recall." "Just under a quarter of a mile," Holmes confirmed. "Hardly sufficient distance in which to conceal a train, assuming conventional methods." He glanced at the clock upon our mantelpiece. "The last train to Blackheath leaves in 40 minutes. I suggest you pack your medical bag, Watson. The fog is lifting in the southern parts of the city, but it will be a cold night." As he spoke, he was already moving with swift efficiency about the room, gathering various items and placing them in his pockets, his magnifying glass, a small measuring tape, a specimen box, and his ever-present notebook. "You believe there may be injured passengers?" I asked, already rising to collect my things. "I believe we must be prepared for any eventuality," Holmes replied, "including the possibility that we are dealing with a crime of unprecedented scale and ingenuity." As I hurried to my room to pack a small valise, I heard Holmes murmur to himself, "A single glove with a strange marking. Most suggestive." 20 minutes later, we were in a hansom cab, rattling through the foggy streets toward the station, embarking on what would prove to be one of the strangest adventures I have ever had the privilege to chronicle, the baffling affair of the Dover Express. Chapter 2. The Facts at Blackheath. The fog had indeed begun to lift as our train pulled into Blackheath station. A thin, watery moon occasionally revealed itself through the racing clouds, casting a silvery light upon the scene which greeted us. The small station was uncommonly busy for the late hour, with railway officials in their dark uniforms gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, while a contingent of police constables moved purposefully about the platform. Inspector Lestrade detached himself from a knot of officials as we descended from our compartment. The Scotland Yard detective's ferret-like face appeared more pinched than usual, with dark circles beneath his eyes, suggesting he had been without sleep since the strange occurrence. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot express my relief at seeing you," said Lestrade, pumping Holmes's hand with uncharacteristic vigour. "We are utterly confounded." "So your telegram suggested," replied Holmes coolly. "But pray, let us have the facts in their proper order before we speculate further." Lestrade nodded and led us toward the mouth of the tunnel, which gaped like a great black maw at the edge of the station. The Dover Express departed from Charing Cross at precisely 8:42 this evening, with 41 passengers and 6 crew. The train was observed by the signalman, William Groves, to enter this tunnel at 9:17. It was due to emerge and pass the signal box on the far side at approximately 9:19, where it would have been seen by the second signalman, Henry Taft. "And yet it did not," interjected Holmes, his keen eyes already examining the tunnel entrance, where several constables with lanterns were visible just within. "Precisely, Mr. Holmes. Taft, growing concerned after several minutes, sent a telegraph to this station. The station master immediately dispatched men to investigate, thinking there had been a derailment or some other accident within the tunnel." "And they found nothing," I said. "Not a bolt nor a splinter," confirmed Lestrade grimly. "We have had men searching the entire length of the tunnel for hours now. There are no side passages, no hidden tracks, nothing but solid brick walls, the rails and the gravel bed between them." Holmes had moved to the tunnel entrance, where he dropped to one knee, examining the rails with his magnifying glass. The beam of his dark lantern played over the polished steel surfaces, which gleamed dully in its light. "Has anyone traversed these rails since the incident?" he asked sharply. "Only the search parties," replied Lestrade, "and they have kept to the gravel path beside the tracks." Holmes nodded, his attention wholly focused on something which I could not perceive. He moved slowly into the tunnel, his body bent almost double as he followed some trail along the rail. I observed that he paused occasionally to scrape some substance into one of his specimen envelopes. "Come, Watson," he called after a few minutes. "There is something here which deserves your medical opinion." I hurried after him, Lestrade at my heels. Some 50 yards into the tunnel, Holmes's lantern illuminated a series of faint marks upon the brick wall. To my eye, they appeared to be nothing more than the ordinary smoke stains one would expect in a railway tunnel, but Holmes regarded them with intense interest. "What do you make of these scrape marks, Watson?" he asked, directing the light to reveal what indeed proved to be a series of parallel scratches upon the sooty bricks, approximately the height of a man's shoulder. "They appear recent," I ventured, noting the fresh brick dust visible in the lantern light. "Made by some metal object drawn forcefully against the wall." "Exactly so," said Holmes with approval. "And observe their regular pattern, evenly spaced, extending for nearly 6 feet along the wall and precisely parallel to the ground. Most curious." Holmes continued his examination, moving further into the tunnel with Lestrade and myself following. The inspector clearly shared my bewilderment, but had learned from experience not to interrupt Holmes in his observations. After we had proceeded some distance, Holmes abruptly straightened up. "The glove, Lestrade. You mentioned a glove with some unusual marking." The inspector produced an evidence pouch from his coat pocket. "Found it just here," he said, indicating a spot near the centre of the tunnel. "A gentleman's glove, right hand, expensive quality. Not the sort of thing one would expect to find discarded in a railway tunnel." Holmes took the pouch and carefully extracted a fine leather glove of dark brown kid. It was indeed of excellent quality, with a subtle monogram on the inner wrist. But what caught my attention, and clearly that of Holmes as well, was a symbol which had been carefully stitched into the back of the glove in silk thread of a deep crimson colour. The design resembled nothing I had ever seen before, a complex arrangement of curved lines intertwined with what might have been Oriental characters. "Most singular," murmured Holmes, turning the glove over in his long fingers. "Tell me, Lestrade, what information do you have regarding the passengers?" "A complete manifest from the railway company," replied Lestrade. "Mostly businessmen and a few tourists. However," he added with a significant look, "there was one passenger of particular note, Lord Arthur Harrington, carrying diplomatic papers to Dover, where he was to board the morning ferry to Calais." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Indeed, that is a suggestive detail." He carefully returned the glove to its pouch and handed it back to Lestrade. "I shall need to examine the full passenger list, and I wish to interview both signalmen as well as anyone else who might have observed the train this evening." As we turned to leave the tunnel, a young constable came running toward us, his face flushed with excitement. "Inspector Lestrade, sir. There's a boy here, says he saw something strange by the tunnel last night. A sort of blue glow, he says." I noticed a sudden sharpening of Holmes's expression at these words. "Bring him to us immediately," he commanded with an authority that the constable obeyed without question, despite it coming from a civilian. "A blue glow, Watson," Holmes murmured as we walked back toward the station. "Combined with these unusual scrape marks and this Eastern symbol, the affair grows more interesting by the moment." "Surely you don't believe the train has truly vanished?" I asked, incredulously. Holmes's grey eyes held a glint that I knew well, the look of a hunting hound that has caught a promising scent. "I believe, my dear fellow, that we are dealing with a mystery worthy of our complete attention. The game is afoot." Chapter 3. The Curious Case of Mr. Finch. The following morning found us in a small, cramped office at the railway company's headquarters in London, where Holmes was meticulously examining the passenger manifest of the vanished Dover Express. The events at Blackheath had continued well into the early hours, with Holmes interviewing the boy who had witnessed the strange blue illumination, a sharp-eyed lad of 12 named Timothy Burrows, who delivered newspapers in the vicinity of the tunnel. "It weren't like regular light, sir," the boy had told us, his small face earnest in the lamplight. "More like St. Elmo's fire, as my grandfather calls it, the kind that sailors see on the masts during a storm. All shimmery and blue it was, coming from inside the tunnel 3 nights ago." This testimony, combined with our examination of the tunnel, had convinced Holmes that we should return to London immediately to pursue the identities of the passengers more thoroughly. Now, as I watched, Holmes suddenly straightened from his hunched position over the papers, a gleam of satisfaction in his grey eyes. "Watson, observe this peculiarity," he said, indicating a line on the passenger manifest. "Mr. Arthur Finch, ticket purchased for the full journey to Dover, yet his name does not appear on the list of missing persons provided by Inspector Lestrade." I examined the document. "Perhaps he missed the train," I suggested. "The ticket was collected by the conductor, according to this report," Holmes replied, tapping another paper. "No, Mr. Finch boarded that train, but is not among those reported missing. That suggests either an oversight in Lestrade's investigation, which, despite my frequent criticism of the good inspector's methods, I think unlikely in this case, or something far more interesting." "You believe this Finch may be connected to the train's disappearance?" "It is a lead worth pursuing," Holmes replied, carefully copying the address listed for Finch into his notebook. "Let us pay a visit to 14 Dorset Street and see what we might learn of the elusive Mr. Finch." An hour later, our hansom deposited us before a narrow brick house in a respectable but unremarkable neighbourhood. The curtains were drawn across all windows, and there was a general air of abandonment about the place that was immediately apparent. Holmes rapped sharply on the door, but as expected there was no answer. After a moment's consideration, he led me around to a small side alley where a narrow gate provided access to the rear of the house. "I fear we must take certain liberties with Mr. Finch's property," Holmes remarked, producing a small case of slender tools from his pocket. A moment later, the back door yielded to his expert manipulation, and we found ourselves in a small, cluttered kitchen. The interior of the house confirmed our initial impression. It had been vacated in haste. Drawers stood half open, papers were scattered about, and a thin layer of dust had begun to settle on all surfaces. Holmes moved through the rooms with swift efficiency, his keen eyes taking in every detail. "Observe, Watson," he said, indicating a series of marks upon the floor of what appeared to be a small study. "Heavy equipment has been moved recently, scientific apparatus, judging by these chemical stains upon the wood." He knelt, suddenly running his fingers along a section of floorboard. "And here a hiding place beneath the floor." With deft movements he pried up a loose board, revealing a small cavity beneath. From this space he extracted several folded papers, which he spread upon a nearby desk. "Most illuminating," he murmured, examining what appeared to be technical drawings of an unusual mechanical device. The diagrams were intricate and covered with annotations in a cramped, precise hand. I could make little sense of them, though certain components resembled electrical apparatus I had seen in scientific journals. "Can you decipher these, Holmes?" I asked. "Only partially at present," he admitted. "The principles employed here are highly advanced, but see this notation here, Blackheath configuration, and these calculations regarding tunnel dimensions. Our Mr. Finch had a specific interest in that very tunnel." As Holmes continued his examination, I conducted my own search of the room and discovered, thrust halfway beneath a bookcase as if hastily hidden, the charred remains of a letter. I carefully extracted it and brought it to Holmes's attention. "Well done, Watson," he said, delicately unfolding the partially burned paper. "Must proceed with the Blackheath experiment despite concern, unprecedented opportunity. Effects cannot be predicted with certainty." He read from the fragments. "The signature is burned away, but the letterhead, though partially destroyed, bears a German address." "German agents?" I suggested, recalling Lord Harrington's diplomatic papers. "It is too early to draw definitive conclusions," Holmes cautioned, though I could see the theory had not escaped his consideration. "Let us complete our search." We spent another half-hour examining the house, finding further evidence of scientific work and hasty departure, but nothing that revealed Finch's current whereabouts or the nature of his experiment. As we prepared to leave, a timid knock came at the front door. Holmes motioned me to silence and approached the door cautiously. Upon opening it, we discovered an elderly woman with a concerned expression. "Oh, I thought perhaps Mr. Finch had returned," she said, clearly surprised to see strangers in her neighbour's home. "Mrs. Holmes inquired politely. "Mrs. Whittaker, I live next door. Are you associates of Mr. Finch?" "In a manner of speaking," Holmes replied smoothly. "I am assisting him with certain affairs during his absence. May I ask when you last saw him?" "3 days ago," the woman replied promptly. "He left in quite a hurry just after those foreign gentlemen visited him again." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Foreign gentlemen? You've observed them before?" "Oh yes, 3 or 4 times in recent weeks. Speaking German, they were— I recognized it from my late husband's business associates. Very serious-looking men, not at all friendly. The last time there seemed to be quite a heated discussion. I heard raised voices, though I couldn't understand the words, of course." Holmes asked several more questions, but Mrs. Whittaker could provide little additional information of value. After thanking her, we departed, Holmes immediately hailing a cab to return us to Baker Street. "The pieces begin to arrange themselves, Watson," he remarked as we rattled through the London streets. "A scientific experiment, German involvement, a diplomatic courier, and a train that vanishes without trace. The puzzle grows more complex, yet more defined." "And more dangerous, I should think," I added. Holmes nodded, his expression grave. "Indeed. I believe our next avenue of inquiry must be the Blackheath Historical Society. There is something about that tunnel, some quality that made it the focus of Finch's experiment. We must discover what secrets it holds." Chapter 4. The Blackheath Historical Society. The Blackheath Historical Society occupied a modest Georgian building set back from the main road, its weathered stone facade speaking of an institution more concerned with the past than with its own appearance. We arrived shortly after noon, having spent the morning in consultation with Holmes's brother Mycroft, who had received our urgent message with his customary efficiency. "I can tell you this much," Mycroft had said, his corpulent form ensconced in his favourite chair at the Diogenes Club. Lord Harrington was indeed carrying sensitive documents detailing our naval deployments in the Mediterranean. If these papers were to fall into the wrong hands, particularly German hands, the consequences could be most severe. Holmes had nodded thoughtfully. "Then we must consider the possibility that the train's disappearance was engineered specifically to intercept these documents." "A rather excessive method, wouldn't you say?" Mycroft had replied with a raised eyebrow. "To make an entire train vanish for the sake of one diplomatic pouch?" "Unless," Holmes had countered, "the method itself was the subject of the experiment, with Lord Harrington's presence merely providing an opportune test case." This troubling hypothesis occupied my thoughts as we were greeted by Mr. Edwin Blackwood, The elderly curator of the Historical Society, a small, stooped man with bright, inquisitive eyes magnified by spectacles of considerable thickness. "Mr. Holmes, what an unexpected honour!" he exclaimed, leading us into a room lined with glass cases displaying local artefacts. "I've followed your cases with great interest in Dr. Watson's accounts. How may the Society be of service?" "We are investigating a matter connected to Blackheath Tunnel," Holmes replied. "Specifically, I am interested in the history of the land upon which it was built." If the curator found this request unusual, he gave no sign. "You've come to the right place, sir. The Society holds the most comprehensive records of Blackheath's history." "The tunnel, you say?" "Completed in 1873, part of the rail expansion by the South Eastern Railway Company. But the land itself has a far more ancient history." He led us to a small library at the rear of the building, where he selected several bound volumes and unfurled a yellowed map across a large oak table. "This area," he said, placing a gnarled finger upon the spot where the tunnel now ran, "was once the property of a most curious organization, the Brotherhood of the Eastern Star they called themselves. Founded in the 1600s, they were an esoteric order dedicated to the study of ancient wisdom from the Orient." Holmes leaned forward with sudden interest. "What became of this brotherhood?" "Disbanded, or more accurately driven out around 1705, Blackwood replied. "There were unsavory rumors, allegations of forbidden practices, dark rituals. Local authorities seized their property and the members scattered. Some, it was said, returned to Tibet, where the order had originated." "Tibet," I murmured, recalling the strange Eastern symbol on the glove. "Indeed, Dr. Watson, the Brotherhood claimed to possess knowledge brought from Tibetan monasteries, secret sciences unknown to European scholarship." He pulled a thin volume bound in faded red leather from the shelf. "This contains what little we know of their practices. It includes accounts of villagers who claim to have witnessed members of the Brotherhood causing objects to vanish before their eyes." "Conjurers' tricks, no doubt," I offered. "Perhaps," said Blackwood, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "Though some accounts are difficult to dismiss so easily. There is, for instance, the case of Thomas Wolsey, not the Cardinal, but a local landowner of the same name, who in 1704 accused the Brotherhood of making his prize stallion disappear from a locked stable. A week later, the horse reappeared in the same stable, apparently unharmed, but bearing a strange brand upon its flank that matched the Brotherhood symbol." Holmes carefully examined the illustration in the book, a complex arrangement of curved lines with oriental characters that bore a striking resemblance to the emblem on the glove found in the tunnel. "Are there other accounts of disappearances associated with this Brotherhood?" Holmes inquired. "Several," confirmed Blackwood, warming to his subject. "Most notably in 1698, when a merchant and his wagon were said to have vanished while passing the Brotherhood's grounds, only to reappear 3 days later with the merchant claiming he had been gone but moments." I saw Holmes's eyes narrow slightly, the telltale sign that some significant connection had formed in his mind. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have any record of recent inquiries about the Brotherhood or the land where the tunnel now stands?" The curator considered the question. "As a matter of fact, yes. A gentleman visited perhaps 2 months ago, most interested in the same history we've been discussing. He examined these very documents for several hours and made extensive notes." "Would this gentleman's name happen to be Arthur Finch?" Holmes asked quietly. Blackwood's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Why, yes, he introduced himself as a scholar of occult history. Do you know him?" "We have a passing acquaintance with his work," Holmes replied enigmatically. "Did he show particular interest in any specific aspect of the Brotherhood's history?" "He was most concerned with the precise location of their property in relation to the modern tunnel, and with accounts of their supposed abilities to make objects vanish and reappear. He also inquired about any artifacts or relics that might have survived. And are there such artifacts? Blackwood hesitated. There is one item, though it's not generally displayed. A moment, please. He disappeared into a back room, returning with a small wooden box. Opening it carefully, he revealed a piece of dark stone, roughly the size of a chess piece, with an unusual crystalline structure that caught the light in a manner I had never before observed. This was allegedly used in their ceremonies, Blackwood explained. Analysis in recent years suggests it may be a type of mineral not native to England, possibly of Himalayan origin. Holmes studied the stone without touching it. Most interesting. Mr. Blackwood, you have been exceedingly helpful. As we prepared to depart, I noticed Holmes slip one of the smaller historical volumes into his pocket, having first placed several coins on the table, significantly more than the book's value. Blackwood either did not notice or chose not to comment. Our return to our lodgings at the village inn near Blackheath was conducted in thoughtful silence, Holmes clearly deep in contemplation of the day's discoveries. Upon entering our rooms, however, it became immediately apparent that something was amiss. "Wait here, Watson," Holmes whispered, his hand moving to the revolver in his pocket. He made a quick but thorough examination of the 2 rooms we had engaged, finally motioning me to enter. "Someone has searched our belongings," he said quietly, indicating the subtle signs that would have escaped any eye less keen than his own. Most thoroughly, yet with care to avoid obvious disturbance. "What were they seeking?" I asked. "Information, no doubt, as to how much we have learned," Holmes replied, examining the lock on the door, which showed no signs of forced entry. "But they have left us a message as well." He pointed to the mirror above the washstand, where spidery characters had been traced in the dust, the same Oriental script we had seen on the glove and in the historical records of the Brotherhood of the Eastern Star. "A warning, Watson," Holmes said grimly. "We are moving in dangerous waters and someone wishes us to retreat to the shore. But the tide of mystery draws us ever deeper, and I have no intention of turning back." Chapter 5. The Foreign Connection. The morning following our discovery of the mysterious warning found us aboard a train bound for Portsmouth. Holmes had spent much of the night examining the papers we had recovered from Finch's residence, and as the first light of dawn crept through our inn window, he had announced his conclusion. "We must follow the scientific thread of this investigation, Watson," he had declared, folding the technical drawings with precision. "These notations indicate that Finch consulted with a Dr. Heinrich Weber, formerly of the University of Heidelberg, now residing in Portsmouth. The mathematical calculations here bear his distinctive methodology. I am familiar with his monograph on electromagnetic theory." Now, as our carriage rattled southward through the Hampshire countryside, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his lean figure huddled in his travelling coat, grey eyes fixed upon the passing landscape, though I doubted he truly saw it. His mind, I knew, was whirling through the facts of our case, assembling them into patterns invisible to ordinary perception. "What I cannot yet determine," he said suddenly, breaking his long silence, "is whether Finch was the architect of this affair, or merely a pawn in a larger game. The German connection suggests the latter, particularly in light of Lord Harrington's diplomatic papers." "You believe German agents engineered the train's disappearance to capture those documents?" I asked. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, a characteristic gesture when he was arranging his thoughts. "It seems an unnecessarily elaborate method for espionage, yet the evidence points increasingly in that direction. The question that most perplexes me is the method employed. How does one make a railway train vanish without trace?" The remainder, of our journey passed in contemplation of this seemingly impossible question. Upon our arrival in Portsmouth, Holmes consulted a small notebook containing addresses he had extracted from Finch's papers, and we soon found ourselves approaching a modest cottage on the outskirts of the naval town, set apart from its neighbours and surrounded by a neglected garden. "Dr. Webber may be reluctant to speak with us," Holmes warned as we approached the door. "Be prepared for initial resistance." His prediction proved accurate. The man who answered our knock was thin and stooped, with the stained fingers and distracted air of a dedicated scientist. His initial response to Holmes's introduction was one of unmistakable alarm. "I have nothing to say to you," he declared in heavily accented English, attempting to close the door, which Holmes prevented with a strategically placed foot. "Dr. Webber, we are not here to cause you difficulty," Holmes said calmly. "We merely seek information about your colleague, Arthur Finch." The name produced a visible reaction, a tightening around the German's eyes, a slight paling of his already sallow complexion. "I know no one by that name," he insisted, the tremor in his voice betraying his falsehood. "Come, sir," said Holmes with sudden sharpness, "a man of science should have greater respect for observable facts. Your reaction clearly indicates familiarity with Finch. Moreover, I have seen your correspondence with him regarding certain electromagnetic experiments." For a moment Weber seemed to teeter on the edge of decision. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he stepped back and gestured us inside. The interior of the cottage revealed a curious mixture of domestic comfort and scientific workshop. One entire room had been transformed into a laboratory, with electrical apparatus, measuring instruments, and blackboards covered in complex equations. "I should never have become involved with Finch," Weber said, sinking into a worn armchair. "His ideas were brilliant but dangerous, too dangerous. When I realized what he intended, I severed our association." "And what did he intend precisely?" Holmes inquired, his tone conversational, though his attention was keen. Weber hesitated, then seemed to decide that full disclosure was his safest course. Finch had discovered, or believed he had discovered, a method to alter the fundamental properties of matter through the application of specific electromagnetic fields. His theory suggested that under precise conditions involving a rare mineral compound and sufficient electrical power, solid matter could be temporarily shifted. "Shifted?" I prompted when the scientist paused. "It is difficult to explain in layman's terms," Weber replied, with the impatience common to specialists addressing the uninitiated. "Not disappeared, but transitioned to a state where it no longer interacts with ordinary matter, as if occupying the same space but in a different dimension, if you will." "And this mineral compound," Holmes said quietly, "would it happen to be of Tibetan origin?" Weber's head jerked up in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "Yes, Finch obtained samples from a private collector, materials supposedly brought back from a Himalayan expedition. He claimed ancient Tibetan texts described a substance with precisely the properties his theory required." "Which would explain his interest in the Brotherhood of the Eastern Star," I murmured to Holmes. "Indeed, Watson," he replied before turning back to Weber. "Doctor, was Finch working alone in these experiments, or did he have sponsors?" Weber's gaze dropped to his hands. "There were others involved, German nationals. I believed initially they were fellow scientists, but later suspected they were agents of my government. They provided funding and equipment, but also direction. They wished to weaponize his discovery," Holmes stated flatly. Weber nodded miserably. "The military applications were obvious. Imagine troops or artillery that could vanish and reappear, or ships that could pass undetected through blockades. When I realized their intentions, I withdrew my support, but Finch continued. He was obsessed with proving his theory correct, regardless of the consequences." And the Blackheath Tunnel experiment? Holmes pressed. What was its purpose? A full-scale test, Weber whispered, his face ashen. The tunnel's particular geological composition made it ideal. Certain iron ores in the surrounding soil would amplify the electromagnetic effect. Finch had calculated that with sufficient power, he could shift an entire train temporarily out of our reality. A heavy silence followed this extraordinary statement. Finally, Holmes spoke. Where is Finch now? I do not know, Weber replied, and I believed him. After our disagreement, we ceased communication, but I fear... He broke off, glancing anxiously at the window. Holmes followed his gaze. You are being watched, he stated. Since Finch's experiment, yes. Men I do not know observe my home. I have received warnings not to speak of what I know. Weber's hands trembled. You must leave. It is not safe for any of us. As if to confirm his words, a shadow moved across the window, brief but unmistakable. Watson, Holmes said quietly, I believe it is time for us to depart, though perhaps not by the front door. We left through a rear garden gate, Holmes leading us through a series of narrow alleyways until we emerged on a busy thoroughfare some distance from Weber's cottage. Even then, Holmes's vigilance did not waver, and at his insistence, we doubled back several times to ensure we were not followed. We are dealing with dangerous adversaries, Watson, he said as we finally made our way toward the station. Men who would go to extraordinary lengths to protect their secret. As we turned a corner into the street leading to the railway station, I caught sight of a figure in a dark coat observing us from beneath the shadow of a shop awning. Holmes had seen him too, for his pace quickened. Do not look back, Watson, but prepare to run when I give the word, he murmured. Our conversation with the good doctor has not gone unnoticed. Chapter 6. The Tibet Expedition. The pursuit through the Portsmouth docks that followed our encounter with Dr. Weber was an affair I shall not soon forget. Holmes led our flight with the unerring instinct of a man intimately familiar with the geography of England's port cities, darting through warehouses and shipping offices until we finally eluded our pursuers by boarding a small coastal steamer bound for Southampton. From there we returned to London by an indirect route that Holmes insisted upon, taking particular care that we were not observed. Our adversaries are both determined and resourceful, Holmes remarked, as we finally settled into our familiar quarters at Baker Street late that evening. The fact that they had Weber under surveillance suggests they are monitoring all potential sources of information about Finch's experiment. But what do we do now? I inquired, still somewhat winded from our exertions. We know how the train might have disappeared, but not where it is, nor how to recover it. Holmes stretched his long legs toward the fire that Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully lit in our absence. We must pursue the origin of this extraordinary mineral that forms the foundation of Finch's experiment. Weber mentioned it came from a Himalayan expedition. I suspect we shall find the connection we need in the person of Sir Richard Clement. The explorer? I thought he had become something of a recluse after his return from Tibet. Precisely, Watson. And what might cause a renowned explorer, formerly known for his gregarious lectures and scholarly publications, to withdraw from society? Perhaps an experience or a discovery that he could neither explain nor share. The following morning found us journeying northward to Derbyshire, where Sir Richard had retired to his family estate. As our train wound through the rolling countryside, Holmes shared what he had learned through telegrams exchanged with various contacts during the night. The British expedition to Tibet 5 years ago was officially sanctioned for geographical and botanical research, he explained, but rumour suggests they ventured into regions forbidden even to local inhabitants. 3 members of the original party died under circumstances that were never fully explained. Sir Richard, the leader, returned profoundly changed. Clement Hall stood in splendid isolation amidst the Derbyshire moorland, its grey stone walls and ivy-covered towers projecting an air of ancient dignity. Our reception, however, was far from welcoming. The austere butler who answered our knock informed us that Sir Richard received no visitors and suggested, with the particular disdain that only an English servant can convey, that we return to the village inn and send our request by post. "Pray inform Sir Richard," Holmes replied smoothly, "that we have come to discuss the Brotherhood of the Eastern Star and their knowledge of dimensional transition." This extraordinary message produced the desired effect. After a brief disappearance, the butler returned, his demeanour noticeably altered, and led us through dim corridors to a library where a fire blazed, despite the mild spring weather. The man who rose from behind a massive desk bore little resemblance to the robust explorer whose photograph had appeared in the illustrated papers. Sir Richard Clement was gaunt, his once powerful frame diminished, with prematurely whitened hair and the restless eyes of one who has witnessed things beyond ordinary comprehension. "You are either exceptionally well-informed or exceptionally foolhardy to speak of such matters," he said, without preamble. "How do you know the Brotherhood?" Holmes explained our investigation with brisk efficiency, outlining the train's disappearance and the connections we had uncovered. Sir Richard listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I had feared something like this might occur," he said when Holmes had finished. "When specimens from our expedition began disappearing from secure storage at the British Museum, I suspected someone had discovered their true nature. I should have destroyed them all upon our return." "Then the mineral described by Dr. Webber is indeed real," Holmes said. Sir Richard moved to a cabinet, unlocking it with a key he wore around his neck. From within he withdrew a small wooden box, nearly identical to the one we had seen at the Blackheath Historical Society. Inside lay a piece of the same darkly gleaming stone. "The local name translates roughly as Gateway Stone," Sir Richard explained. "In a remote monastery near the Tibetan plateau, we discovered ancient texts describing its properties. The monks warned us against taking samples, claiming the stone was sacred and dangerous." "But you did so anyway," I observed. "Science demanded it," he replied without meeting my eyes. The texts described phenomena that defied conventional understanding. Objects passing through solid matter, disappearances and reappearances, temporal distortions. As men of science, we could not leave without investigating such claims. "And what did you discover?" Holmes prompted, his keen gaze fixed upon Sir Richard. The explorer's hands trembled slightly as he replaced the stone in its box. "We conducted experiments, crude by modern standards, but sufficient to demonstrate that the monks' claims were not mere superstition. An electrical charge applied to the stone under specific conditions produced effects. Objects placed within the field would vanish for brief periods before reappearing. Sometimes they returned changed, sometimes not at all." "And your colleagues who died during the expedition?" Holmes asked quietly. Sir Richard's face contracted with pain. "Jenkins volunteered to enter the field himself, convinced the effect would transport him only temporarily. He vanished before our eyes. 2 days later, his body reappeared, perfectly preserved, yet without life, as if he had been suspended. Hampton and Forrester died attempting to recreate the experiment with a larger piece of the stone. There was an unexpected energy discharge. They were incinerated." His voice had fallen to little more than a whisper. "When we returned to England, I secured the remaining samples in the British Museum's geological collection, disguised as ordinary mineral specimens. I burned most of our notes and retreated here, haunted by what we had witnessed and what it might mean in unscrupulous hands. "Yet someone has rediscovered your findings," Holmes said, "a man named Arthur Finch." "I received a visitor by that name nearly a year ago," Sir Richard confirmed. "He claimed to be writing a monograph on Tibetan artifacts. His questions seemed scholarly, but in retrospect, too specific. Shortly afterward, I learned that certain specimens were missing from the museum." Holmes leaned forward intently. "And the Brotherhood of the Eastern Star, how are they connected to this Tibetan knowledge?" "The texts we discovered mentioned an ancient order that carried their secrets westward centuries ago, establishing enclaves throughout Europe. Such enclave was reportedly established in England. The symbol we found inscribed on the monastery walls matches descriptions I've since found of the Brotherhood's emblem." As Sir Richard spoke, I noticed a shadow pass across one of the library's high windows, too large for a bird, too deliberate for a cloud. Holmes had seen it too, for he rose suddenly to his feet. "Sir Richard, I believe your home is under observation. Is there another exit from this room?" The explorer's face paled. "A small door behind that tapestry leads to the gardens. But why?" His question was answered by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the house, followed by raised voices. "It appears," said Holmes grimly, "that the guardians of this secret have followed us here. I suggest we depart with haste." "One moment," Sir Richard said, thrusting the box containing the stone into Holmes's hands. "Take this. It may be your only hope of reversing what Finch has done. But beware. Its power is unpredictable. Watson, your revolver," Holmes said sharply as the sounds of disturbance grew nearer. I drew my service weapon as Holmes guided us toward the concealed door, Sir Richard following with surprising agility for one so diminished. As we slipped into the gathering dusk of the garden, I glimpsed through the library window a figure unlike any I had expected, a man in Western clothes but with unmistakably Tibetan features, wielding what appeared to be a short staff of unusual design. Chapter 7. Return to Blackheath. Our escape from Sir Richard Clement's estate was a narrow affair that tested even Holmes's considerable resources. The Tibetan intruder proved remarkably agile, pursuing us across the moonlit gardens with a silent determination that spoke of extensive training. Only by splitting up momentarily, a stratagem Holmes improvised with characteristic aplomb, did we manage to elude him and make our way to the village inn where we had left our luggage. "We dare not linger, Watson," Holmes declared as we hastily gathered our belongings. "Our pursuers have demonstrated both persistence and considerable reach. We must return to London immediately." A fortuitous late train carried us southward, though Holmes insisted we remain vigilant, changing compartments several times during the journey. By dawn we had reached Baker Street, where Holmes immediately set about transforming his chemical corner into an improvised laboratory. "The mineral sample Sir Richard provided may be the key to the entire affair," he explained, carefully removing the stone from its wooden container. "If Finch has indeed used this substance to somehow displace the Dover Express into another dimension, then understanding its properties may allow us to reverse the effect." For the next 2 days, Holmes immersed himself in a series of experiments that filled our rooms with acrid fumes and occasional flashes of uncanny blue light. Mrs. Hudson's protests were silenced only by Holmes's grave assurance that his work might save numerous lives. I assisted where I could, though much of the technical aspect remained beyond my comprehension. On the evening of the second day, Holmes sat back from his apparatus with an expression of grim satisfaction. "I believe I begin to understand the principles at work," he announced, rubbing his reddened eyes. "This mineral possesses electromagnetic properties unlike any known to conventional science. When subjected to specific electrical currents, it creates what one might term a field of displacement that temporarily shifts matter into a state that no longer interacts with our physical world. Like Weber suggested, I noted, yes, though his understanding was incomplete, the effect is not merely spatial but temporal as well. Objects or persons caught within this field experience time differently. What might seem moments to them could be days or even weeks in our experience. Then the passengers on the train may be entirely unaware of their predicament, Holmes finished. To them, the journey continues in what appears to be normal fashion, though they travel through a dimension adjacent to our own. But can they be brought back? I asked, the human implications suddenly overwhelming the scientific wonder. Holmes's expression grew more troubled. That is the question that has occupied me these past hours. According to my calculations, the effect should be temporary. The natural laws of our universe exert a constant pull to restore displaced matter to its proper state. Yet Finch must have found a way to maintain the displacement. Using the unique properties of the Blackheath Tunnel, I suggested, recalling Weber's comments. Precisely. The iron ore composition in the tunnel walls, combined with the electromagnetic field generated by his apparatus, has created a sustained displacement effect. Holmes consulted a series of calculations scrawled across several sheets of paper. But if my theory is correct, a similar apparatus, properly calibrated and activated under specific conditions, might counteract the displacement, essentially pulling the train back into our dimension. And you can construct such an apparatus? With certain materials, yes. I have already sent telegrams to obtain the necessary components. Holmes stood and stretched his lean frame, the effects of 2 days' intense concentration evident in his haggard appearance. There is, however, another factor to consider. The meteorological conditions must match those of the night the train disappeared. My calculations suggest that a similar atmospheric electrical potential is necessary. As if in answer to this requirement, a distant rumble of thunder penetrated the closed windows of our lodgings. Holmes crossed to the window and gazed out at the gathering storm. "Fortune favours us, Watson," he said with sudden energy. "A spring thunderstorm approaches London from the southwest, the same direction and pattern as the night of the disappearance. If my calculations are correct, conditions at Blackheath will be nearly identical within the next 12 hours. Then we must prepare to return to the tunnel," I said. Holmes nodded. "I must complete the assembly of this device first." He gestured to what appeared to be a modified electrical generator connected to a brass framework holding several pieces of the Tibetan mineral. "We shall depart for Blackheath at dusk." As Holmes returned to his work, I took the opportunity to examine the evening papers, which still carried reports of the missing train. Public speculation had run rampant, with theories ranging from elaborate robberies to supernatural interventions. The authorities had maintained a discreet silence, beyond acknowledging the ongoing investigation. By early evening, the storm had reached London, lashing the windows with sheets of rain, driven by a rising wind. Holmes had completed his apparatus, a compact but sturdy device that could be transported in a large valise, though its weight necessitated careful handling. "We must avoid detection, Watson," Holmes cautioned as we prepared to depart. "Both the German agents and our Tibetan friends will be alert to any activity near the tunnel. I have arranged for one of the irregulars to meet us with a maintenance key that will grant us access without alerting the railway authorities." We travelled by cab as far as the outskirts of Blackheath, continuing on foot through the driving rain, keeping to secluded paths that Holmes seemed to know by instinct. The darkness and the storm provided valuable cover, though they made our progress difficult, particularly with the burden of Holmes's device. The tunnel entrance loomed before us like the maw of some great beast, its brickwork glistening in the intermittent flashes of lightning. A small figure detached itself from the shadows, one of Holmes's Baker Street irregulars, a sharp-eyed lad named Billy, who had proven his worth on previous cases. "Got the key right here, Mr. Holmes," the boy reported, producing a large iron key from beneath his sodden jacket. "No one's been round for hours on account of the storm." Holmes rewarded him generously, sending him back to safety before we approached the service door built into the side of the tunnel entrance. The key turned with difficulty in the rusted lock, but eventually yielded, allowing us access to a narrow maintenance path that ran alongside the tracks. Inside, the tunnel was pitch dark save for our lantern and the occasional flash of lightning visible from the entrance. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and metal, and the thunder echoed ominously through the curved passage. "This way?" Holmes directed, consulting a small compass before leading us deeper into the tunnel. According to my calculations, Finch's device should be approximately 200 yards from the entrance, where the concentration of iron ore in the surrounding soil reaches its maximum. We proceeded cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the gravel underfoot. The beam of our lantern illuminated the gleaming rails which stretched ahead in perfect parallel lines that seemed to converge in the darkness beyond. "Listen, Watson," Holmes whispered suddenly, halting our progress. "Do you hear it?" I strained my ears, at first detecting nothing but the distant rumble of thunder. Then gradually I became aware of another sound, a faint but distinct mechanical humming emanating from somewhere ahead in the darkness. "Finch's apparatus," Holmes breathed, his face illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning that penetrated even this far into the tunnel. "It still functions, which means the train remains in displacement. Come, we must hurry. We have little time to counteract the effect." As we advanced toward the source of the humming, the atmosphere within the tunnel seemed to change subtly. The air felt charged, making the hair on my arms stand on end, and occasional wisps of blue luminescence, similar to the glow described by the boy Timothy, danced along the rails. "Holmes," I whispered urgently, "I believe I hear something else, something like the distant approach of a train." My friend's grip tightened on my arm. "You are not mistaken, Watson," he replied, his voice taut with controlled excitement. "I hear it too. If I am correct, we are about to witness the impossible, the ghost of the Dover Express returning to the precise point of its displacement." Chapter 8. The Train That Never Was. The ghostly sound of an approaching train grew more distinct as Holmes led me deeper into the tunnel, our lantern casting long shadows against the curved brick walls. The strange blue luminescence had intensified, dancing along the rails like ethereal foxfire and casting the entire passage in an unearthly glow. "There!" Holmes exclaimed suddenly, directing the beam of our lantern toward a recess in the tunnel wall. What we discovered might have passed for ordinary maintenance equipment to an untrained eye, but Holmes immediately identified it as Finch's apparatus, a modified electrical generator connected to an elaborate framework of copper coils and brass fittings, with several pieces of the Tibetan mineral strategically placed within the assembly. The device hummed with power, and occasional sparks of blue energy crackled between the components. "Ingenious," Holmes murmured, examining the apparatus without touching it. "Finch has connected his device to the telegraph lines that run through the tunnel, drawing continuous power to maintain the displacement field. But see here, Watson, signs of hasty assembly and recent damage." Indeed, portions of the device appeared scorched, and several connections had been crudely repaired. "Something went wrong with the initial experiment," Holmes continued, his voice raised to be heard above the increasing sound of the phantom train and the growing storm outside the tunnel. "The displacement occurred as planned, but the apparatus was damaged in the process. Finch may not have been able to reverse the effect even had he wished to do so. "But where is Finch himself?" I asked, glancing nervously down the tunnel where the blue glow seemed to be coalescing into a shimmering wall of light. "A most pertinent question," replied Holmes, turning toward a dark shape I had overlooked in the shadows beyond the device. Directing our lantern in that direction revealed the tragic answer. Arthur Finch lay sprawled on the tunnel floor, his body contorted in a manner that suggested a violent death. Holmes knelt quickly beside the corpse, his practiced eye taking in the details of the man's demise. "Dead approximately 1 week," he announced. "Electrocution is the most probable cause, though there are also signs of a struggle, defensive wounds on the hands and a blow to the temple. He was not alone when the experiment went awry." "The German agents?" I suggested. "Most likely. They would have wanted to secure both Finch and his creation, but something went catastrophically wrong." Holmes rose and returned to the apparatus. "No time for further examination, Watson. The electromagnetic conditions are intensifying, and if my calculations are correct, we have mere minutes before the displacement field reaches its peak resonance." With swift, precise movements, Holmes opened his valise and withdrew his own device, setting it up directly opposite Finch's apparatus. The distant thunder now seemed continuous, reverberating through the tunnel, and I could have sworn I felt the ground trembling beneath my feet. "What you are about to witness, Watson, defies conventional understanding," Holmes said as he made final adjustments to his device. "When activated, this apparatus will generate a counter-frequency to Finch's displacement field. The two fields should, in theory, cancel each other, allowing the train to revert to its natural state within our dimension." "And the passengers?" I asked, thinking of the 47 souls who had unknowingly become part of this extraordinary experiment. "If my theory is correct, they will have experienced the journey as normal, unaware that weeks have passed in our world." Holmes straightened, his finger poised above a brass switch on his device. "Stand back, Watson, and be prepared for anything. The energies we are about to unleash are unpredictable." I retreated several paces, my service revolver drawn, though against such uncanny forces I doubted it would prove of much use. The sound of the approaching train had reached a crescendo, though no physical engine was yet visible, only the shimmering wall of blue energy that now filled the tunnel ahead of us. "Now, Watson!" Holmes cried, throwing the switch on his device. The effect was immediate and spectacular. A blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from Holmes's apparatus, colliding with the energy field generated by Finch's device. The resulting discharge sent currents of electricity arcing across the tunnel, illuminating every brick and pebble in stark relief. I shielded my eyes against the glare, feeling a strange sensation like the momentary suspension of gravity. Then came a deafening roar, not of thunder, but of iron wheels on rails and the unmistakable sound of a steam engine at full pressure. Through the dissipating light of the energy discharge, the solid form of a locomotive materialized, followed by passenger carriages, the Dover Express appearing as if conjured from thin air, rushing through the very space where moments before there had been nothing but empty tunnel. The train slowed with a screech of brakes, as if the driver had suddenly perceived an obstacle ahead. Steam hissed from the engine as it ground to a halt mere yards from where we stood. For a moment all was chaos, confused shouts from the carriages, the train crew leaping down to investigate the unexpected stop, passengers peering anxiously from windows. Amidst this confusion, I observed a tall, distinguished figure leap from one of the first-class compartments and attempt to slip away into the shadows. Holmes had seen him too. "Lord Harrington, I presume," he said loudly, stepping forward to block the man's path. "Or should I say, Colonel Werner Schulze of German military intelligence? Your diplomatic papers would make interesting reading, I have no doubt." The man froze, then reached inside his coat. I raised my revolver, but Holmes was faster. With a swift movement worthy of his boxing days, he struck the impostor on the jaw, sending him sprawling to the tunnel floor. "You'll find his real identity papers in his left inside pocket, Watson," Holmes directed as I moved to secure the stunned agent, along with whatever naval intelligence he was tasked with delivering to his masters. As railway officials and bewildered passengers gathered around us, Holmes quickly took charge of the situation, sending for Lestrade while ensuring that none left the scene. The passengers, as he had predicted, were utterly unaware of their extraordinary displacement. To them, the journey had proceeded normally until the unexpected stop in the tunnel. "It is most extraordinary, Holmes," I said, as we watched Lestrade's men escort the German agent away. "These people have been missing for nearly 3 weeks, yet to them no time has passed at all." "The human mind rationalizes what it cannot comprehend," Holmes replied, observing the milling passengers with a thoughtful expression. "By tomorrow most will have convinced themselves they experienced nothing more than a routine delay. Few wish to confront the possibility that our understanding of the universe is far from complete." Later, as we stood in the pre-dawn light outside the tunnel, watching the delayed Dover Express finally continue its journey, Holmes revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "I discovered this in a hidden compartment of Finch's device," he said, handing me a small journal. His notes on the experiment, including his eventual realization that he was being used by German agents. It appears he attempted to sabotage his own creation when he understood the military applications they intended. "And died for his conscience," I observed solemnly. "Indeed, though whether at the hands of his German employers or the Tibetan guardians who sought to protect their ancient secret, we may never know with certainty." Holmes gazed thoughtfully at the rising sun. "Some mysteries, Watson, are perhaps better left unsolved. I believe this particular case falls into that category." "And Finch's apparatus?" I inquired. "Already dismantled and secured along with my own device and all remaining samples of the mineral. Mycroft will ensure they are placed beyond reach of those who might misuse them." Holmes's expression was grave. "There are forces in this world that mankind is not yet ready to harness, Watson. Some boundaries of knowledge were perhaps meant to remain uncrossed." As we walked away from Blackheath Tunnel, leaving behind the site of one of the strangest cases in our long association, I could not help but reflect that for all his dedication to cold reason and scientific method, Sherlock Holmes possessed the wisdom to recognize when even he stood at the threshold of mysteries beyond human comprehension. Thanks for joining us for the disappearance of the Dover Express. Did you suspect the German spy posing as Lord Harrington before Holmes revealed his true identity? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Holmes's wisdom: when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This is Alfie signing off from Café Stories.